The Race F1 podcast is brought to you by Merrill. It's no secret that finances can get complicated. Like me, I'm sure many of you listening will have financial goals. Perhaps it's even saving up for that trip to a Grand Prix far afield. Whatever your goals are, from starting a business to saving for kids' college to getting more stamps in your passport, you want a straightforward path there. But life tends to have other plans, and things get in your way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan that can help keep your money in sync with your life. So with the bull at your back, no matter what life brings, you get a clear path forward. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
You know how many times users searched football on eBay.com last season? Try 12,000 per hour. That's because eBay has been the home of collectibles since 1995 with an unrivaled selection of trading cards and memorabilia. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia, all the epic finds you need are right here on eBay. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going straight to ebay.com/theathletic. That's ebay.com/theathletic. Get busy building your collection today.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and after an unusually long late-season break, F1 is back for its frenetic conclusion with a double bill of triple headers starting in Austin this weekend. But how could the championship picture change, and will Lando Norris finally get himself properly into a points battle with Max Verstappen? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to look ahead to the business end of the season are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Ben Anderson. Well, Scott, we'll come to you first. F1's back. For the second time this year, it's back. Third, I guess.
Yeah, it's nice. It was a bit weird having the autumn break after the summer break because obviously the F1 teams didn't go into shutdown, but the F1 world kind of did. It was actually surprisingly quiet pretty much until the Haas Toyota news broke. There wasn't a huge amount going on. But yeah, good to be back at it. And obviously Austin's just a fun one to kick back off with. And I see, for the benefit of the people who can't see Ed right now, he's already leaning into the Austin spirit because he's doing this podcast while wearing a cowboy hat and some boots with spurs on them. So you're leaning into the Austin culture already, Ed.
Exactly. This is why I can't walk around or it'll be clanking and all sorts of things. So, yeah, getting into the spirit of it. Although it's a bit early for that. It's, about 6 a.m. as I got in yesterday. So, an early bit of podcasting for me, which is never a bad thing. I've done some podcasts at very, very odd times. So I think we all have, really. So
you're very keen. You're out there very early, aren't you, on Tuesday morning local time? Or you would have landed on Monday evening, I guess, in Austin. Yeah.
I think it was just it was probably just flight costs or something.
Just forget when the race was.
Exactly. But it's an interesting part of the year because obviously this triple header's very much a sort of transcontinental one, isn't it? Because we work our way down.
It's not a bad place to be a couple of days early either. Austin.
Exactly, yeah.
It's one of the cooler ones.
Exactly, Austin's a great city. I'd recommend anyone who, if they're thinking about going to the United States Grand Prix, definitely come to Austin. And Ben Anderson, you're also back and raring to go.
Always here. I've been recently organising my own travel because I'm going to be joining you, Ed, at the Las Vegas Grand Prix, which is not part of this triple header, but part of the final triple header as we get to the end of the season. So, a lot of visa sorting out and various rigmarole that had kind of been buried in my past, and I'd forgotten what a pain it is to go through all of that stuff just so that you can attend a race.
And in more podcast attendee hat news, Ben seems to have forgotten which podcast he's on. He thinks he's on a MotoGP pod based on that KTM hat.
Yes, I've got a KTM number one hat. I mean, it's tangentially relevant because we're recording a Bring Back V10's 1997 revisited episode later, and it is the Austrian Grand Prix. So I felt I had to wear this hat for that podcast. I'm just warming up on this one.
I can put a hat on as well for the benefit of the audio-only nature of this medium.
Oh, it's Brad Pitt.
Yep.
Hang on, do I need my glasses?
For the benefit of the people who can't see, I have an Apex GP hat on. One of the cool, very random, wasn't it, Ed? When was it? It was was it Hungarian Grand Prix?
Hungary, I think they
just randomly F1 turned up with a bunch of the Apex GP hats that the crew, obviously, and actors that were wearing appeared in the shooting of it as a little thank you for people that had tried to we had not the audacity, we had the generosity to just go about doing our jobs basically, and we got given hats for it. So that was quite nice.
You're easily bought off. People know your price now. One hat.
Ed never has a hat. I know from travelling with Ed for many years that we turn up to desert races, boiling hot sun, and he always forgets his hat and has to buy an overpriced merchandise hat.
The most neutral one
yes,
he can
exactly.
find.
Pirelli.
The most neutral. I remember
Pirelli's normally there.
The Australian Grand Prix hat in 2019.
Yeah, I did buy an Australian
remember that
one.
one.
Yeah,
because you didn't want to. It was definitely Australia 2019 because you didn't want to buy a Ricardo one because it was quite a garish gold and green Ricardo hat with a big number 3 on it, and you thought, I probably won't get away with that, but I'll be an official ambassador for the Australian Grand Prix itself.
Yeah, I never go with a partisan hat, so I bought a number of event hats and occasionally a Pirelli cap or two. So I regularly do that, and indeed I've forgotten to do that here as well. So I'll have to find myself some kind of headgear, but it's sometimes better to do it away from the track where it's a little bit cheaper and more cost effective.
Well, if you're not going to go for the cowboy Stetson, you could actually go for a Ricardo cap this weekend. I think it would be quite a good sort of nod to the end of his F1 career. So the partisanship there might be well appreciated.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. I'm sure there'll be a few Daniel Ricciardo caps in the crowd still, given he's so popular here. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking about matters surrounding that a bit later in the podcast. But let's get into it, Scott, because after this untimely break, the season now basically boils down to this pair of triple headers. So what are we expecting to happen? Are we going to get a proper shooting war in this championship?
Yeah, it's going to having been so drawn out as a season to this point. It's such a long schedule. It's the first time they've pulled off the 24 races, and it's been such slow progress for Norris to try and eke his way back into championship contention. So it has just kind of felt quite prolonged as a season, but now it will suddenly it will be resolved really fast. And I think we'll know at the end of this triple header if we have a championship battle or not, because the gap will either get smaller, stay the same, or get bigger. And unless it's smaller. Like, there's no title battle, is there? Like, if it gets bigger than this, he's not overcoming that in 3 races. And if it stays at 50-odd points, he's not overcoming that in 3 races. The gap has to come down over the next 3 events. And these 3 races will fly past, partly because it's a sprint in Austin, but then you go into Mexico, then you've got Brazil straight after. The triple headers, as hard as they are to do on site, they fly by in reality. So it's kind of it's quite a fun conclusion in that regard. And the thing that I like most about it is, with the fact that we know that Red Bull are going to be trying to improve the car, it's not like they're set now and this is what Red Bull has for the rest of the year. It is a bit of an unknown. It's not just a case of, right, how much can Norris and McLaren do? It's also, what do Red Bull have up their sleeve to try and fend Norris off? It's quite fun, actually. Despite it being quite a big points gap, I can't say with any degree of certainty, really, beyond the fact that I think Verstappen will hold on. It's impossible to actually say, right, this is how the next 3 races will play out, let alone the next 6.
It seems to me that it's basically a question that will be answered in this triple header of the shape of the season. Will it continue to be as it's been recently, Verstappen and Red Bull limping on, just trying to protect that points lead and doing it quite well? Or can they get back closer onto, not even necessarily level terms with McLaren? That would be the ideal for them, or ideal would be ahead. Or can they get closer so at least they can consistently always be behind? So that's the question for me. So it's a very difficult thing to ask you, Ben, because it will depend on upgrades and all sorts of things that we can't give the answer to. But if you had to put $10 on it, what do you think will be the shape of this sharp end of the season?
I imagine McLaren will continue to be strong. I imagine the gap could fluctuate, but I mean, Norris has taken 26 points out of Verstappen over 5 races since the summer break. If he takes another 26 out of him over the next 5, that would take him to Abu Dhabi with like a sort of 16-point gap. There might be less if the sprints facts go well for him, and maybe there's a car or two between him and Max to make that even better. But even then, you're looking for a slice of help to get it over the line. That's probably the best case scenario as well. I think this run of tracks traditionally has been quite strong for Red Bull and Max in particular. So given they're coming off a Singapore weekend where he was actually really good on what was their worst track of the previous season, that's a bad omen, I think, for McLaren, because I feel like even if the car doesn't improve, Max will be there or thereabouts over this next run of races. Mexico, the Honda engine's mega, isn't it? So he could even take points out of Norris at that race. Really, it feels like a almost confected title fight still at this stage. The gap's too big. Red Bull are still, even with their problems, a bit too competitive. And I feel like we can't really get properly excited about it being a title fight until some massive misfortune befalls Max and he loses a big chunk of points to Norris. Say Austin, he breaks down and Norris takes not only the sprint but also the race victory and Max loses 25 points. Then it feels like game on, because it's one chunk in one go, and then he can afford to just nick these 7-8 point gaps over the remaining races to turn the tide.
But it could also go the other way.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
The sooner that big swing happens as well, the better for Norris and McLaren, purely on how it changes things for Verstappen. Because you could look at it just purely from a numbers point of view. If he is going to take, let's say, 40 points out of Max over the next 4 races or 5 races to set up a real decider in Abu Dhabi, it kind of doesn't matter just purely statistically if he does 5 points here, 20 points there, 5 points there. The gap will be what it will be. But if he takes 25 points out this weekend, 30 points out this weekend, massively changes the dynamic. It's not just a numbers game. Then suddenly it's a psychological game as well. And I saw some comments. I saw some comments from Helmut Marko sort of saying, Max is in the strongest position because Norris has some like mental weaknesses that Max doesn't have. And I agree that I would agree with the point that Verstappen has a stronger all-round resolve in a title fight and a leading situation because he's much more familiar with it. He's shown he can do it. We know that very specific circumstances can rattle him, but generally he handles it very well. Whereas Norris has had peaks and troughs this year. There have been times where he has left too many points on the table. He has made mistakes. But the couple of times that Verstappen has lost it this year have been when he's been massively on the back foot against Norris and McLaren, Austria and Hungary. So, if the points gap shrinks quite quickly, does that play out again, but in a championship picture? And then race by race, Max is under a lot more pressure. He's not just nursing a lead, he's hanging on to one. So, all Norris and McLaren can do there is go out, focus on the United States Grand Prix weekend, try to win the sprint race, then try to win the Grand Prix. Maximise the points, and then just see how many points they take out of Verstappen and Red Bull as a result of that. They're going to need help at some point because the rate that they've been going isn't going to be enough on their own. And I also fear they might lose a little bit of assistance from Merc and Ferrari because Merc's not been quite as strong as it sort of deceptively looked pre-break. And I think we might have just come out of Ferrari's best run of the season in terms of circuits. So it might be more of a 2-horse race again.
There will be an upgrade for Ferrari for Austin as well, so that could change things again. I'm sure Mercedes will have something as well. So it's close enough for there to be shifts and changes there. But I think the key point you said there, and it's why I've been so repetitive saying that Norris has never quite got into the championship fight. He's never got into that zone where the pressure's really on Verstappen. He can afford to be quite strategic and, okay, well, I lose a few points here, fine, yeah, just keep doing what I'm doing. And that's why it's a game changer to get close enough, and he should be closer, ideally, and that's what I'm kind of waiting to see if it happens to get a proper championship fight.
He's in the better position psychologically because it's easier to chase than be chased. But at the same time, those comments that Marco's been making that Scott referenced, that feels like quite defensive language from Red Bull. It's almost like they're rattled and they want to kind of talk up Max and shield him a bit and talk down Norris. I think what could be really crucial is this expected Red Bull update for Austin, because as I was saying, if the car just remains as it is now, slightly recalcitrant, but just about usable in Verstappen's hands on certain circuits, and I think this upcoming run is largely favourable for them anyway, they could just take the conservative approach and he could kind of crawl over the line, probably, provided they're reliable. Obviously, they don't want to do that. They want to make the car better, and it's in kind of Red Bull's racing DNA to go for it a bit. But with a sprint weekend and everything else coming up, there's a chance, especially with their track record this year, that they mess the car up more. And so if this upgrade is bad and they have to unpick it, that could be the window of opportunity that gives Norris the chance to take that huge lump of points that he's been missing in the run of races coming into this triple header.
Do we know for certain right now that as we record this, that Red Bull will have that upgrade in Austin? We know that one's coming because they've talked about it and made it very clear that what they had in Baku was only going to be the start because they didn't have a huge amount of time to prepare it. And timeline-wise, it would make sense given they've just had 3 weeks to work on something. But because Austin's a sprint weekend, that is a bit trickier to do. And they talked about maybe being careful. What do you think, Ed? Do you think they'll roll it out? I feel like competitively, they need to get it on the car regardless of the weekend format.
Yeah, as soon as it's ready, you get it on the car. It's only if it's been delayed that they don't do it, because there's no ideal time to do it now, because Mexico's not an ideal place to do it. So yeah, it's not like a situation where you're at Monaco saying you've got Spain next. Then you can think, oh, actually, we won't bother with it for Monaco. We'll put it on in Spain. But that's not an option.
And it says absolutely nothing for the team too. Although they've had these calibration problems and correlation problems that Horner's addressed. If you've had basically a month to work on all this stuff, analyse your data, figure out what you're going to do, parts have already been produced anyway, because like you say, Scott, this was partly addressed already even before the break. To have had all that time and then to come to Austin with nothing and just say, oh no, we're going to park it. I mean, that suggests that you don't have confidence in what you're doing, that you're not sure of your methodologies. And it's not exactly admitting defeat, but it is in the development war. So I feel like I'm with Ed, really. I think you have to, whoever you are, if you've got something to throw at the car, you've got to do it, because otherwise you run the risk of, say, Ferrari clicking with the final part of their floor update, for example, and jumping you, Mercedes just getting things together, because their car might not change massively, but they feel like a team that swings so far in and out of the performance window. This kind of break could have done them a lot of good in terms of identifying how to mitigate that. So I just don't think you can afford to stand still, to use the old cliche in Formula One.
McLaren's the one that can be a bit more strategic with its upgrades. They've got one more sort of package to come, which is doing the bits they didn't do in the last upgrade, was basically, to paraphrase how Andrea Stella put it. So they can maybe be a little bit careful with it, but if there's performance that you can confidently put on, you always want to do it. But it is interesting though, Scott, because although Ben said it's easier to chase than to defend, and I think you're right almost psychologically, but if you look back historically in F1, that thing of playing catch-up is really difficult, because if you've got a bit of a lead, you can afford to be a little bit conservative. If you're doing the chasing role, you feel you've got to be a bit more aggressive, and that maybe dials up the risk a tiny bit at times. And then if the risk's up, things can go wrong. So I think if you're robust and strong, which I think Red Bull as a racing team very, very much is, and Max Verstappen, I think certainly in this scenario, I actually think that they're in quite a nice position. I think they'll be able to manage that quite well, unless there is that curveball that means there's a 27-point swing or something. It
depends on the race circumstances and how McLaren want to play it. I have a feeling that under Andrea Stella, pragmatism will reign supreme, and they will focus on what do we need to do to maximise our score from this race. Let's not get carried away by it. We'll roll the dice, because if it pays off, it's a massive, massive swing, and it's going to help us in the championship. If they can stay pragmatic and make the right decisions, they should win more races than any other team on current form. Obviously, we don't know how the upgrades will change things, but they should. So they might be minded to just go on that front. But then there could also be race-specific circumstances, right, where they just think it's now or never, like, here's our chance. It, for example, might not necessarily be in Austin, but and I'd be surprised if it was in Mexico, but if there's rain, for example, if there's rain in the air and there's a bit of uncertainty about what tyres to be on or what strategy to go for, that could be one where they just decide, if we've got enough faith that this could work, let's box opposite Verstappen and Red Bull. Because then, if we're going to finish second, we're going to finish second by more points, but we might suddenly have a massive amount of points to take away. So I think it will be event specific. But I do just have a feeling the way Stella is, I think Stella knows that the way that they win this championship is by not trying to win this championship. It's by maximising each individual race weekend. Whereas the Verstappen Red Bull philosophy can be more championship focused. It can be a lot more, let's not be stupid and try and chase something that we're probably not going to win today. Because if we lose 7 points here, it's not the end of the world.
Although, if it does come down to specific race circumstances, I'd back McLaren more in a kind of cleaner, more straightforward race scenario than one that's complicated, because I feel like, if anything, this season has taught us that McLaren in a kind of tricky, complicated, marginal strategy situation tend to get a bit outfoxed, not only by Red Bull, but by other teams in that front group. So that's probably at their weakest, when they have to kind of think a bit laterally or do something different or do something right in the split second, A or B. So I'd think if the races are more like, straightforward conditions and Norris is on pole and they haven't got too much to manage, they'll be fine. Otherwise, I think they might get a bit overloaded. Whereas for Red Bull, it's quite straightforward, isn't it? It's all about Max. Constructors is probably gone for them, but they can put everything behind Max defending that points lead. And I think defending a points lead is obviously the most advantageous situation. I think just psychologically, given everything that's going on at Red Bull, that's more difficult. But if anyone can handle it, it's Max, right?
Yeah, certainly. I think we'll see McLaren being very process focused, just put one foot in front of the other. There may be a test of whether they've learnt properly from a few of the strategic mistakes in unusual conditions. They've been pretty good, I think, strategically in steady state conditions. But yeah, it's been in those rain scenarios and safety cars that they haven't been quite as fleet-footed as they should be. But there's going to be an interesting
drivers.
Test. Right, exactly, yeah. But it's going to be an interesting test of everything they've learned and how strong a fighting unit they've coalesced into.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
You saw that play when your QB dropped back, looked off the safety, and threw a dime deep for the go-ahead touchdown. That's not just hall-worthy, that's wall-worthy, and you can own a piece of it when you shop the unrivaled selection of trading cards and memorabilia on eBay, the home of collectibles since 1995. Huddle up with 132 million users around the world to find that rookie patch auto you can't find anywhere else. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia, all the epic finds you need are right here on eBay. Plus, with eBay Authenticity Guarantee for trading cards, you know that what you buy is the real deal. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going straight to ebay.com/theathletic. That's right, your collecting journey kicks off right here, right now at ebay.com/theathletic. Come through and collect with us today.
Right, Ben, let's talk about the race formats, because Austin's the return of sprint events, and there's actually a run of 3 sprints in 5 races. What impact, if any, do you think that will have on the championship?
I don't see it having a huge impact. Again, unless there's some kind of incident or misfortune that befalls either protagonist. You know, if you're out of a sprint race and your rival's taking, maximum points from it, that's enough to make a tangible difference. But as I've said before on an episode of this show, I feel like the scoring system of the sprints in general is just too small and too bunched to really make a tangible difference if everyone's running cleanly. And obviously we're in such a generally super reliable era of Formula One, and roughly the pecking order. There's not a huge opportunity in a sprint running normally to take big lumps out of somebody. It's more something to just get through, bank the points, add them to the table and just reset. It does compromise your preparation, certainly. So there's that element to consider. I think for McLaren, they'll be breezy about the sprint format, even maybe introducing an update. I know we talked about the fact that they've got a bit more headroom and they could maybe be a bit more conservative with what they do. But of course, they upgraded Norris's car for Miami. That was a sprint weekend and it went superbly. It was a breakthrough, wasn't it? So that should give them confidence. If they've got something ready to go, they don't really need to worry about hitting the ground running with it. The other teams, obviously, less so. Mercedes and Ferrari with well-known development problems through this rule cycle. Red Bull now running into that. But Red Bull, they feel like almost more extreme in that they seem to either hit the ground absolutely in the right window and don't really have to do much, or they're way off. So for them, I'd be a bit more concerned about coming to a sprint weekend with an upgrade just because of everything that's happened, and just because it seems intrinsically their car can be quite difficult to refine and get the setup right for. And if you've lost key practice sessions doing that puts Verstappen more on the back foot.
I disagree slightly about the impact of the sprints, but with a couple of with a clear caveat of we don't know how it will play out competitively. But there are 2 reasons for it. One is that if McLaren does retain the edge, it's 3 more occasions within the race weekends that remain for Verstappen and Red Bull to be at each other's throats a little bit if they're on the back foot, if they're struggling for whatever reason, and that could have a tangible impact in terms of not maximising things and missing out on a couple of points. But it could also have slightly intangible impact. We talked before about the psychology of being defending the position. If they're coming under attack and they're losing bigger points as well, that can play into it. Then the other element is if Ferrari and Mercedes are in the picture, it is potentially a way for Norris to gain an extra 5 points or so on each of those sprint weekends, which could make a massive difference over the. If Norris, like I've said this a couple of times, Norris and McLaren, their focus has to be on maximising, right? And because of the way we have these interloping sprint events, that means trying to win 3 sprint races and 6 Grand Prix over the rest of the season. They're not going to do that. I'd be really surprised and very impressed if that is what they manage to do. But if he's able to win the 3 sprints, just hypothetically, and the Red Bull is just categorically not the second fastest car at those sprint events, there's potential for Verstappen to only be picking up 3 or 4 points from those sprint races, which, if that happens regularly enough, is an extra podium for Norris in the fight against Verstappen. And if he gains anywhere from... I think if he only gains 3 or 4 points on Verstappen over these sprint races, I'd be amazed if that has an impact on the championship. But there is that potential for it to be a double-digit gain on Verstappen. And with so few events remaining, it is effectively an extra Grand Prix or 2 that he could get to try and close the gap.
It's been a long time since we had a sprint, right? Was Austria the last one?
Yes.
I think it was, yeah.
Where, of course, Red Bull actually made quite a big step between the sprint components and the main Grand Prix components, because, of course, Parc Fermé is no longer imposed.
Yeah, and they were strong there. It was a really good example of what I was saying before, of sometimes the Red Bull just hits the sweet spot straight away. They barely change it, and it's great, and they can just build on that. I feel like sometimes the sprint format can help you by not overcomplicating things. And Red Bull sometimes in this phase have been guilty of trying a bit too hard. I mean, Verstappen said, didn't he, in Baku, that they chased the car a bit too much, and he went into qualifying with a bad setup and then was stuck with it. Maybe on a sprint weekend they wouldn't have done that because they didn't have as much time to experiment. So the lack of practice can be your friend. I feel like if Ferrari and Mercedes are going to if Red Bull are going to hypothetically underperform in this sprint phase, and there's an opportunity for Ferrari and Mercedes to get between the McLarens and Verstappen, I think that really relies on Merc and Ferrari execution in the sprints being absolutely on point. And I'm not totally convinced. I feel like they're still a bit too random in how they'll perform at an individual circuit, or whether they'll just find performance in one session that they just inexplicably lose in the next one, particularly Mercedes. And the whole format, even though he doesn't like them, I feel like the format really suits Max, a guy who can be so improvisational and is so good at racing. That might just play to his strengths, alongside the fact that, as I've said before, these circuits coming up, I really do feel they suit Red Bull. It's more simple than some of the challenges they've faced recently.
It might also be a slight detriment potentially to Piastri and McLaren, because I feel like it's more Norris who is just, from the first lap in practice, just absolutely on it for the rest of the week. Like Singapore was a really extreme example of it. But we've seen it a few times this weekend. So it could be that the sprint weekend doesn't take one of the McLarens out of the picture, but just opens the door slightly for Verstappen to maybe beat a McLaren where in a normal weekend he might not, especially as another thing in Verstappen's favour, to build on Ben's point, is that he's also just fantastically good with minimal track time. He's one of those drivers who does, in FP1, he needs his first or second flying lap is basically quicker than any other. Yeah, exactly. So I think that'd be entirely possible. And I think the point that was made earlier about the timing of the previous three sprint races and the versus Red Bull slump is really important, because there'll be a lot of people going into this that will be making sprint race claims and points related claims based on how the first three sprint went. So, Verstappen scored this many points versus Norris in the sprint so far, so blah, whatever. It's irrelevant now. That happened in a completely different competitive order, and it would be unless the Red Bull upgrade, whenever it appears and whatever it is, turns out to be absolutely brilliant and completely restores Red Bull to how it was before that slump. So you're looking at the first sort of quarter of the season. I think it's going to be a disappointment if Norris and McLaren don't outscore Verstappen in the sprint races alone, for the final three sprint races alone.
If I was in McLaren's position, I'd be relatively happy to be going into Austin as a sprint weekend, because Austin's got quite a broad range of corner speed profiles. So it is one where, well, in the past we've seen people getting the setups wrong there when they had the Parc Fermé regulations. So there is maybe an opportunity there, because they've got a car they understand well, and provided no upgrades cause confusion, and they seem to have such a good grasp on everything they're doing. We have to say that when McLaren put parts on the car, they generally work well and work quickly. That could create a nice little opportunity for them. But it shows how many variables there are, because like you say, Scott, all through the second half of the season, people have been saying, oh, right, this is now the competitive order, so if you extrapolate this, and it's too close for it to work like that, which is what makes it so exciting and interesting. But yeah, I think we'll see. Austin will kind of give us a hint of what the broad trend could well be, but the specifics, it's still very volatile.
Well, the most basic example of what you've just said would be that if you try to extrapolate the season so far for the remaining 6 races, then Verstappen's going to outscore Norris over the rest of the season, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you just do a simple 50-odd points divided by 18 events, or whatever it's been so far, Verstappen's outscoring Norris by a rate of this many per event, and therefore he looks to outscore him by that much before the end of the season. That's not how it works. You don't score points on a permanently increasing basis.
Exactly, yeah. And the thing that McLaren can't do is have a sort of disastrous weekend. I mean, like a Norris engine failure, let's say, or whatever. There's always these imponderables, particularly when we're later in the season and they're quite well used parts. So yeah, it's an interesting scenario to go into, and I think it's going to be a pretty eventful and intense triple header, I would imagine, particularly with the fact 2 of these 3 are sprints, and then we've got one more in the last triple header.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Creating really great retail experiences is tough, especially with multiple stores, teams of staff, fulfillment centers, separate workflows. It's a lot. But with Shopify Point of Sale, you can do it all without complexity. Shopify's point of sale system is a unified command center for your retail business. It brings together in-store and online operations, even across 1,000 locations. Imagine being able to guarantee that shopping is just always convenient. Endless aisles, ship to customer, buy online, pickup in store, all made simpler so customers can shop how and where they want, and staff have the tools they need to close the sale every time. And let's face it, acquiring new customers is expensive. With Shopify POS, you can keep existing shoppers coming back to your stores with consistent, tailored experiences and first-party data that give marketing teams a competitive edge. Want more? Check out at shopify.com/theathletic, all lowercase, and learn how to create the best retail experiences without complexity. Shopify.com/theathletic.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Right, before we head into the next part of the pod, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the Race Members Club. If you love what we do on the Race F1 podcast and want exclusive bonus content like our Q&A and book club episodes, ad-free listening, and the chance to ask questions on our post-race and bonus podcasts, as well as a load of other stuff as well, then the Race Members Club could be for you. The quickest and easiest way to join is via Patreon. It really doesn't cost too much, around the price of a cup of coffee for a month's access, and we even have an F1 only tier if you're not interested in IndyCar, MotoGP or Formula E. If it sounds like the Race Members Club could be for you, you can find a link to sign up in the description to this episode. But in the meantime, by way of a teaser, here's a clip from a recent Q&A we did exclusively for members, where we're discussing whether ingenuity is dead in F1. Next question mark from Benjamin Tampin. Is ingenuity dead in F1? It seems every time a team dreams up a clever new way of doing things, for example McLaren's rear wing, the other teams throw a paddy that they can't get it done and it gets banned. I grew up during the years of FIA, brackets Ferrari, intentional aid. So it's not new, but these days it seems worse than ever.
I think there's still plenty of room for innovation, and I think the recent McLaren example shows that they outthought the competition, and they got 3 races with a really advantageous rear wing on low downforce tracks. And as we earlier just discussed, they're probably the heart of their current advantage is from their cleverness with understanding the aeroelastics of the front wing to give them a balance throughout the speed range. So I think we're still very much in an era where there is a lot of technical ingenuity, but it's maybe not as visible on the exterior as it maybe once was. We're not going to see 6-wheeler cars or fan cars or things like that. But is the double diffuser? Is there a scope for a double diffuser type sort of loophole in the regulations? Well, probably not in the current ones because they've been around for a while, but maybe in the next ones, yeah, quite possibly. So no, I think although the regulations have become tighter, I think it just means that the loopholes are more intricate and more subtle, but require every bit as much ingenuity as before.
Maybe even more, actually, because the rule book is so tight the clever things that are available to you to find are smaller, and you maybe have to be cleverer to find them because they're so difficult. On the McLaren rear wing, I have a bit of a theory that, given that they had been running it before Baku, and if you look really closely at a rear-facing onboard from somewhere like Spa, you can kind of see it, but it's not as obvious. I think the reason it got caught at the time it did was the direction and height of the low sunlight in Baku, because you had as the slot gap was opening, you had razor sharp, harsh sunlight lighting that gap up. And if you watch the footage from somewhere like Spa, that wasn't the lighting wasn't the same. It's not as obvious. So I think the sun, and that's the massive ball of fire in the sky, not the newspaper, grasped McLaren up there.
Right, Scott, let's move back to one of the big recent storylines. The driver market generally has been a source of almost infinite intrigue so far this season. Liam Lawson's back in at RB, so how significant could his weekend in Austin be?
I think it'll be largely insignificant in terms of the bigger picture, because he's got quite a nice little sort of soft re-entry into F1, and also his Red Bull situation, because it's a sprint weekend, so it's a bit of a weird one. But crucially, he's also got a grid penalty because I think the way that it works was
is that Ricciardo's revenge?
It's not because of anything. It's not because of anything Ricciardo's done, but it's because Ricciardo's car is that's how you do it with engine parts and penalties for replacement parts. So Lawson inherits not just the car, but also the component allocation and all of that. So new engine in Austin means a grid penalty. And I suspect that's deliberate from Red Bull. It's a sprint weekend anyway. He doesn't know the circuit. It's a way to kind of, it immediately takes pressure off because he's not in the spotlight in the midfield. He's at the back. And then it crucially gives him a fresh engine in the pool to attack the final races, where they will be expecting bigger from him. So I think this could be a bit of a gentle reintroduction into the fray. But I'd be surprised if that alleviates him of any kind of responsibility or pressure, because it's one of 6 events that he has to audition for a Red Bull Racing seat for next year. You can't undersell the significance of that. When you've got, I think Helmut Marko's role in the decision is reduced compared to what it once was, but all the while Marko's in the fray, I don't think you get freebie races, especially when you've only got 6 of them. So everything Lawson does will be under scrutiny. It's just maybe there's a bit less public scrutiny for the Austin weekend.
But it could be quite tricky because RB have been struggling recently as well. They struggle when there's a wide range of corner speeds as well. That floor upgrade they had recently was okay when you've got a fairly consistent set of corner speeds, but if you've got a wide range all over the place, so I expect they'll have some countermeasures for that. So that could impact the kind of machinery he's got there. But it's just the usual thing, isn't it, Ben, with Red Bull? Every weekend counts, doesn't it? Because decisions are made on very small sets of sample data or very selective data and almost on a whim at times. So you can't really afford to play yourself in if you're Liam Lawson. I don't think he will, because I don't think that's the kind of character that he is. I always remember him in Qatar. He had a pretty bad weekend in Qatar. In fact, Qatar was comfortably last year his weakest weekend. And I remember asking him after the race, I said, well, overall, do you look at this 5-race spell as pretty good? Because it's potentially career-changing. It's shown you should be in F1. And he said, well, I'd like to finish stronger, though, finishing on a low note. And I do think he's got that mentality of make the most of it. So I don't think he'll be cruising and collecting in Austin, certainly.
No, it is a bigger test for him, though, isn't it? Because last year's run, although important,
there's nothing to lose.
Yeah, although important from the sense of showing he belonged. Yeah, it was a free hit. He wasn't meant to be in the car. It was only because Ricciardo mangled his wrist. Whereas this time, it's all about, as Scott has explained before, auditioning for this Red Bull Racing seat and potentially elbowing Perez out, which is obviously what Ricciardo was aiming to do. So the stakes are way higher than they were. The whole Red Bull driver strategy doesn't make sense. I think this engine change for Austin does. That's a more logical decision, not only from the point of view of taking Lawson slightly out of the limelight for his reintroduction, but also just from the competitive point of view of RB. Like, that's probably going to be their weakest track of the ones coming, apart from Qatar. Whereas Mexico, that's where Ricciardo had his most outstanding comeback drive, a circuit that should really suit that car. And so you'd want to give Lawson kind of the best chance to show the best of himself in Mexico, I think, when the car should be good relative to the opposition. So probably this phase is about building to that round. But he still has to make the most of what he's got because, as you say, it's a 6-race shootout, effectively. It will all count. He can't have any low notes because, okay, they might, if he is slightly underwhelming, just keep him there for next year in the RB seat. But I
think that's the worst case scenario for him.
For him.
So that's quite nice. So he's on the grid next year. They haven't confirmed him, but he'll be an RB even if this little mini stint goes badly.
But it then also suggests that he won't have, in their eyes, what it takes to progress. So all that turns into is effectively another Yuki Tsunoda putting yourself in the shop window for someone else to hopefully take you down the road. And he's not going to want that. He's going to want to show that he can be Max Verstappen's teammate potentially. So yeah, he's got to go all out and do more than what he did last year under a greater level of pressure.
What do you two think Lawson actually needs to do or needs to happen across Lawson's performances at RB and Sergio Perez's performances in the Red Bull for that to happen? Because they won't have put a number on it because it's impossible in the midfield and the fact that RB's uncompetitive. And it almost feels like it's going to be borderline anecdotal. Like, how does he perform relative to Tsunoda and what are the circumstances around those performances versus Tsunoda? Plus, how badly does Perez perform versus Verstappen or not? Because if it's Baku level Perez to the end of the year, I can see Red Bull going, don't know what to do. Keep Perez again, because that just seems to be their sort of stock option. So what needs to happen? We've got 6 races, but it's not completely in Lawson's hands, is it?
It feels like if Lawson does a decent job, he's already got enough pressure on that door potentially to do it. And then if Perez is kind of in the mid-season Perez situation, then it could happen. But this is the problem. Like you say, it's almost sort of anecdotal. It doesn't feel like there's much science under it. And there'll be this political battle going on as well at the top as to who, because I think Marco would probably lean towards making the change a lot more than Horner would. So how does that balance of power play out? And yeah, because a 6-race sample set is, it's
better than last year.
It's okay, but it's not,
it's 20% better than last year.
But you've got a 6-race sample set, and straight away you've got Lawson hobbled in one by having the engine change. So it's not the most flat test bed. And I don't know about you, Ben, but I just don't know. Red Bull doesn't have its own mind on drivers really anymore. No. I mean, it was always a little bit flighty and would make dramatic decisions, but at least you felt it was decisive. But now it feels like it's flighty and indecisive when it comes to the drivers. So I find it very hard to think what actually needs to happen, because just about all eventualities can happen and they might not remotely connect to what actually is happening.
Well, I think there's 2 strands going on at once, which is problematic. I mean, there's already the Verstappen vacuum, if you like, that's been created in his wake that's swallowed up a couple of drivers, and they've never really clawed their way out of that hole in terms of having a proper succession. Maybe down the road, there's been chat about Lindblad and maybe Hadjar coming in, drivers that they haven't got a full read on. Lindblad, I know Horner's excited about. Hadjar, they don't know, because it's becoming increasingly clear that you need to blood drivers in the Formula One car to really understand what they can do, because F2's become so random and unpredictable.
And he didn't have a good run at Silverstone in FP1. He was very conservative.
No.
Well, he was good in Mexico last year when he drove what was then called AlphaTauri.
You were very impressed.
I was impressed there, but yeah, Silverstone, it's like he just went ultra cautious and it really didn't go that well.
I think he got told not to crash the car.
Yeah.
And he went too far with it.
And he had a lot of weird test items to do as well, I think. So it wasn't quite the same comparison. But nevertheless, they're not sure about him. They've got a kid who's just still too green coming up that they need to find out about. So they're in a holding pattern of their own making. And then on top of that, you've got Marco and Horner at odds. So the guy who's traditionally been your scout and the guy who really has the most sway in terms of who the picks are, has a bit less power, but still some say. And Lawson it's become clear Lawson is very much his pick, right? Whereas the Perez thing, well, Ricciardo felt more like Horner's pick, and that's now bombed. And the Perez situation is tied into that, in that he's the incumbent, right? So he's in that car, provided that he achieves an acceptable level of performance to them. What that level is, we can never be fully sure, because he's dipped in and out of it. Start of the season, he was there, better than he ended last season. Then he slumped, but then they've decided they haven't given him enough support. So now presumably they've changed some things and given him the support he asked for. That removes some excuses. But is the performance there? Well, in Baku it was, but he's a Baku specialist. Everywhere else you'd say, well, no, actually it's pretty similar to what we've come to expect. But in order for him to be fully levered out of that, there has to be a agreed loss of faith in him, because it's not going to be just easy to bin him. I know there'll be mechanisms in the contract, etc., but it's more difficult to make the change than to keep him there. And then Lawson has to make an overwhelming case. And how he does that, I agree with Scott, it's anecdotal. It's going to be a combination of, can you do a Ricciardo-esque or better performance in Mexico and be up there with the main cars somehow? And then relative to Tsunoda, everywhere else where the car's rubbish, you need to be convincingly better than him, not in this kind of Ricciardo seesaw situation that left them kind of, a bit underwhelmed.
The simplest way to put it is, if you disregard Perez, with Lawson, if he beats Tsunoda 6 times out of 6 on merit, outperforms him, really good, I think he'll be in the Red Bull next season. If he doesn't beat Tsunoda once, there's no way he's getting promoted, even if Perez absolutely stinks up the place. In that situation, they're more likely to finally relent on giving Tsunoda a chance. So reality will obviously fall somewhere between those spectrums, because I'd be surprised if he beats Tsunoda every single time, and if he does, it's a no-brainer. And I'd also be surprised if he fails to beat Tsunoda at all. Lawson's job will basically be, I can see a scenario where he beats Tsunoda half the time and still gets the Red Bull Racing seat, because it's going to be anecdotal, because it's going to be about the specifics. It's not just going to be, it's going to be about trajectory as well. It's going to be about all these little things. It might not even, Tsunoda could outscore Lawson over these final 6 events and Lawson still get the Red Bull Racing seat. There's almost it's partly jokey, but there's no sense trying to impose a strategy on a team that doesn't have a clear strategy for its drivers. So we can sit here and come up with 100 different scenarios about how these 6 events play out, and probably not end up on where Red Bull ends up deciding, because it'll be a bit of a it'll be a bit of a toss of a coin, like when it actually counts. So it is tricky, but as I said at the start, disregarding Perez, this is what happens with Lawson. You can't disregard Perez, because what he does is going to be relevant. It's just, I've got no idea what the percentage is. Is it 50% how Perez does, 50% Lawson? Is it massively skewed in favour of one or the other? No, I don't even think Red Bull knows right now.
But I bet you, if Perez somehow lifts his level to the point where, with a bit of circumstance coming into play too, Red Bull rescues the Constructors' Championship, he'll keep his seat. Because that will be, well, we won both championships. This is precluded on Max winning the drivers as well. That saved him last year. It would save him again, I think.
Well, the only way that happens, you'll have to keep Perez on, because he'll have stopped being just a driver and become an Adrian Newey-esque technical person who actually improves the car, because there is, short of creating the upgrade that makes that car better, there is nothing Perez can do on his own.
Well, they are listening to him, aren't they? They are listening to him now, according to him. So maybe he has been sketching away.
The other thing is, there's also all sorts of curveballs, aren't there? Could they make a move for Franco Colapinto if he keeps doing what he's doing at Williams? And Colapinto, of course, has got to keep delivering, because could he get the Sauber drive? That's still up in the air. That also means Valtteri Bottas needs to try and do what he can with that very uncompetitive Sauber, which isn't very much. He's been doing pretty well with it, all things considered, but there's still a potential for a Red Bull left field move.
Do you think they should still sign Bottas? Because you did a little video for us, didn't you, advocating Bottas as a kind of left field solution for the Perez problem?
Well, it could be. I don't think they will, because Helmut Marko was making some negative comments about Bottas recently, but he's someone who's shown he can, in that sort of scenario, do a decent job. But that just shows how difficult a scenario Red Bull have put themselves into, because they should have all this sorted out, and they haven't.
They are prepared to look outside the pool, though, aren't they? Because Horner's talking more about that, but it feels like he's the one that's kind of leading that. Oh, we need to think more about 2026 and beyond, and is that George Russell coming in or somebody else? And Whereas Marco seems to be still more in his kind of, one of these gambles needs to work, or I need to pluck some young driver from somewhere and get him onto our scheme somehow and hope that clicks.
The problem is that every potential solution they have now with the drivers then creates another short-term problem, because if they do decide Lawson is actually really, really good and needs to be in the Red Bull next season, who they partner Tsunoda with at RB is really unclear, because I don't feel like they want to take the punt on Hadjar, even though the Red Bull philosophy of old would be Hadjar's in there, no question. Yeah. And I think that's how it should be. He's fighting for the title in Formula 2. He's clearly a decent driver. Now, is he a very good F1 driver? Don't know. I don't think Red Bull knows what his ultimate potential is, but he's definitely doing enough to seriously be considered. But it feels like they just want to park him in a testing role and reserve role next season. If they want to overlook Hadjar, it is the only option they have, I think, is to try and get Colapinto if Colapinto doesn't go to Sauber and Audi. But then that is still an admission that the junior program's failed, because yet again you're going outside the pool to get a young driver. It doesn't matter that they're young. It doesn't matter if it's a 21-year-old you're signing or a 35-year-old. If you're going outside the pool, it means that your pool sucks and it's failed and you haven't done a good enough job with it, because the whole point of it is to produce F1 drivers.
And they have got the best possible setup. They've got the junior team. They've got 4 seats. They've had a young driver scheme running for decades. They've got a good portfolio. They should be. There shouldn't even be a question about this. They should have a next cab off the rank, next few cabs off the rank. Right, they go there, they go there, they go there. Yet they're being outdone by others. Look at Mercedes with. Toto Wolff said basically that as soon as Hamilton told him he was off to Mercedes, he thought, yeah, we'll put Antonelli in, because they knew Antonelli was the guy, and they'd recognised that some of the others a little bit ahead of Antonelli. Off to Ferrari, sorry, yeah. So they knew they knew in their driver scheme that someone like Fred Vesti, good as he is, he wasn't ever really seen as the answer to the question, because they had Antonelli coming up behind it. It's like, right, that's clarity of thinking. And no matter what you say about the decision to do it, Mercedes have shown greater clarity of thinking than Red Bull have when it comes to their young drivers.
You've done such a good job, Ed, when we were talking about sprint races earlier, to behave yourself and not go off on a rant and have to put something in the Edd Straw does a rant about sprint races swear jar. I'm going to let you off the next cab off the rank Red Bull phrase that I've heard you say about 100 times over the last couple of months. I might impose a new swear jar of that. That every time you mention a cab off the rank for Red Bull, you have to put a quid
It's such a good phrase. I like it. I'm going to keep using it.
It's perfect as well. Like that is exactly their scenario. That is that it should be ready to go. It's not like that, because of their specific setup. It's not like other teams with junior drivers where, if you're Ferrari or Mercedes with Antonelli, look, next season is coming earlier than they would have initially intended and probably have preferred. The point there was, okay, we want a driver who, if we need to slot in urgently, is a contender, but it's a long-term play. Like, that's what a single team working with one or two really good protégés is working on the basis of. Look, Ollie Behrman at Ferrari. Ferrari's not working on the basis that they need to put Behrman in their team next season, but it's a long-term play. It's like, okay, we've got to have a succession plan, because we don't know if we'll lose Leclerc. Hamilton might only be around for 2 more seasons, blah, 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 blah. With Red Bull, they have to be ready and raring to go, because they've got 2 F1 teams to fill with drivers. And as much as there's been so much talk about RB as a sister team, they have admitted that it needs to go back to being a bit more of an apprenticeship driver-wise for the main team again. You can't do that if you don't have Edd Straw's cabs waiting at the ranks.
Well, the problem they had is that they had 2 cabs that they believed in Gasly and Albon, that they then decided suddenly they didn't believe in anymore.
Yeah, but they didn't believe in Albon, did they? Because they'd already dropped him in the past. That's the thing.
Well, exactly, yeah. They flit in and out, but having committed to them, they then abandoned them. And then the guy who's basically meant to be managing this taxi firm seems to have gone on strike in terms of what his job is, because he's going, no, I want to sign this IndyCar driver. Oh, no, it's the FIA's fault because I can't have him. Oh, let's just punt on this guy because he did a really good job in Williams out of nowhere. Oh, no, he's not very good. Oh, then Christian says, oh, let's just put Daniel in. We know him. Yeah, he was quite good on the sim and he did a test, but he's fundamentally limited. There's something about where they're finding these drivers and who they're picking that isn't working, right? And it goes back a long way, because they've had quite a few flops. If you go back even before we reached this point of chaos, where they've backed drivers that have kind of, as they've got towards F1, whether it's GP3 or GP2 level, they've not been good enough, or they've had some kind of fundamental flaw. I think of people like Tictum, for example, who they picked up, and there was some belief in him, but not full belief. And again, this division between parts of Red Bull that backed him and parts that didn't. Like this is an ongoing long-term problem. It's not something that, although it's really causing angst now in Formula One, it's been a long time in the making.
It's basically, if you've got Helmut Marko's taxi company, it should be operating as a taxi company, but he's actually operating it like Uber. He's just calling one that's hopefully nearby.
Will he show up
when he's needed? But I have one final Red Bull taxi rank question for Edd Straw, which is what happened to the Daniel Kvyat taxi in this analogy? What the hell happened with that?
I've got no idea what was going on there. But he's another example, isn't it? They get rid of him. And they re-sign him. They did the same thing with Brendan Hartley as well. And
Kvyat got promoted and demoted. Was it like 5 times in total if you include the sackings and the bringing back briefly at the end of 18 and blah, blah, blah?
He was the emergency relief taxi that you bring out when you're short of numbers.
It's just bizarre, isn't it? I think you need to make sure that you resolve the problems earlier, I think, is the thing, because they obviously, like, take Pierre Gasly, they obviously had question marks about Pierre Gasly's approach and mentality before they promoted him, but they just sort of, they got caught out by Ricciardo moving, and then they sort of reacted. They've just been in this kind of trigger and reaction sequence, and Horner's right that they need to. There's no correct solution really there for 25 at the moment. So it's make the best of it in 25, and then maybe for 26 they could get onto an even keel, because they've got the multiple things you need to have your next megastar. They've had Vettel, Ricciardo, Verstappen, so that side of things actually has worked pretty well. They've always had a top liner to lead the team going back some time, but they need a good second driver there, because that can really, really cost you, as it is this season. You need to have a strong driver lineup.
They had Sainz, though, didn't they?
Well, they did.
They had Sainz.
But
there's another one that they kind of let slip away.
Exactly. Well,
who could have done a really good job for them.
Yeah, they was sort of use him or lose him, and he decided to force the issue and move on. So they need to be decisive with these sorts of scenarios. And I just don't see it as decisive. And I'm always complaining about what they're doing there, but I just feel like they've got all the resources and everything. And it's strange because so much of the way Red Bull runs its F1 operations is really impressive. The investment, the way things are managed and done, the facility, all of these things. They've got a great race team, great people, but this just seems to be a blind spot, and it feels more of an anachronism. They've basically got a driver scheme, structure and approach that worked 20 years ago in the modern world. And now it's getting more and more like football scouting, isn't it? With the appliance of science, everyone's scouting in karting to try and pick up the next Verstappen, the next Antonelli. And you've also got to be able to sell them on that. And if you're a young driver and you've got Red Bull wanting to get you and various others in the mix, you might think, I don't really like the way things are going with Red Bull. Whereas it should be so easy. Red Bull should be the best show in town for a young driver, and they're not.
So where does the blame for that rest? Is that Marko and his methodology as the advisor and kind of chief scout? Is that just outdated? Because, of course, it's basically 10 years since he scouted Verstappen and fought Toto off to get him on the books. And there hasn't really been a major success since. I mean, not saying find another Verstappen, but in terms of filling out the other bits, it's been really haphazard. And what is it about his methodology that isn't working compared to, say, the other teams like Ferrari, Mercedes, even Renault, Alpine to an extent? They've caught up. Williams, there's been a lot of effort made in other areas that seems to now mean that Red Bull can't have its pick of some of the better young drivers.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit out of date. There's a lot more competition, so you can't rely on happenstance and somebody really impressing you and picking them up. And also, I think, that the world's changed and the way young drivers are has changed. They've also got sort of gradually younger over the years as well. And I think maybe Marko's approach, which in many ways has worked very, very well, feels a bit more out of step. That sort of throw them in at the deep end. I think that the way things have moved socially, that's changed a bit now, and you need to be a little bit more holistic in the way you train people up and treat people. So it just feels a little bit like the world's moved on around him, as it does with all of us ultimately. So yeah, that's the way I see it anyway.
He's also, traditionally been a sort of quasi driver manager figure as well, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Like a sort of confidant. And I feel like, maybe I'm wrong about this, but younger drivers now are more fully formed at an earlier stage and have more of this in place already. So therefore they're better equipped to deal with the landscape because they've got people looking after them and they can decide actually where is best for us to go. Whereas I feel like when Red Bull was at its peak in terms of picking up young drivers, there were many more just desperate good drivers with almost a begging bowl out that needed the support, the help. And that's not so much the case now, maybe. So, like you say, the landscape shifting, as well as perhaps the attitudes being slightly outdated, means they really have become outmoded, haven't they? It's lasting now. It's not just a blip, which is what it felt like kind of in the COVID period. We're kind of 4 years out of that, and it feels like they really are in trouble in this area, and they're just waiting for kind of one of these gambles to just pay off in a massive way to take the pressure off.
Yeah, it's been going on for quite a while now. So yeah, let's see how Lawson gets on. Let's see how that shapes those Red Bull seats for next season. I'm sure there'll be plenty of talk about that, and that's going to be a storyline that rumbles on throughout this triple header. Well, thanks very much, Ben and Scott, for your insight. F1 is back, so stay with us for everything you need to know for the United States Grand Prix.
The Athletic.
You know that feeling, the rush of holding a piece of sports history in your hand, how it connects us to our past and present like nothing else can. Catch the thrill when you shop the unrivaled selection at eBay, the home of collectibles since 1995. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going to ebay.com/theathletic. That's ebay.com/theathletic. Start building your collection today. As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.